This is a great day, and this is absolutely terrific to see this many people, this many organizations, the spirit of it, all coming together to see what we can do to do more, provide more service for people who have served us so well, our veterans. It couldn't be a better cause than this. You know, and I was thinking about it yesterday on the plane flying in to think, you know, you never heard anyone say, we did too much for veterans. You can't say that, can you? You cannot say that. We can't do enough. We cannot do enough. So this is a great day for this. I'm Mike King with Volunteers of America. Volunteers of America has been doing this literally since World War I. Since World War I. This is not a new activity for us. This is something that we're committed to, and we will stay committed to it. We are fortunate today to have the Home Depot Foundation sponsoring this activity and actually sponsoring the expansion of services to veterans all across America. Could we have a round of applause for the Home Depot Foundation? We have a wonderful panel here today, and it is led by someone who is very distinguished in the field of journalism, Mr. David Gregory from Meet the Press. And David, I have to confess that I DVR you every Sunday, absolutely every Sunday, and you have not only brought integrity and dignity to your profession, but also you did a tough thing a few years ago when you stepped up to this task after the early passing of Tim Russell, a good friend of yours, and you've done a marvelous job. So thank you for the job you have done. And we will hand this over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Mike. This is a great opportunity for me, and I think for all of us here. You know, I can only speak as a journalist and as a citizen about this, but I can't recall, certainly in my lifetime, and as a student of history, certainly going back to the Vietnam era, at a time when the country holds the military in higher esteem. And that's really a significant thing. And for all that the country's been through, even in the last decade, I think that esteem has only deepened. And yet, because we've been in a cycle of war now for such a long time, we lose, I think, as a country, a very important emotional connection to the men and women who serve us and sacrifice for us and all their families. And so the test is not whether you can support our troops when they're in war and fighting for our freedom, but how as communities we're going to do at welcoming our veterans home, recognizing the challenges that are so steep and are new and on a scale larger than we've seen before, and how as communities we're going to absorb these veterans into the workplace, into our local institutions and local communities, and recognize the unique set of challenges they face. That's the conversation we're going to have here this morning, because the need is so great. Let me introduce who's here. To my left is my friend Lee Woodruff, a leading advocate for those with traumatic brain injuries, and the wife of ABC News journalist Bob Woodruff, who has experienced this, as you know, firsthand, and has been, the two of them have been such great leaders in this cause and helping veterans. Lee co-authored the best-selling memoir In an Instant, which chronicled Bob's recovery after he was seriously injured by a roadside bomb in Iraq in 2006. The book documents how the Woodruff family coped through a time of such difficulty during Bob's remarkable recovery from traumatic brain injury, obviously a situation that so many military families are dealing with today. She's also, Lee has co-founded the Bob Woodruff Foundation to raise money and assist wounded service members and their families receive long-term care and help these veterans reintegrate into their communities. She talks a lot about these issues. She brings awareness to the issues. She's a real advocate in this area. And she authored a second book, Perfectly Imperfect, A Life in Progress, and her first novel will be published in September of this year. To her left, Barbara Benezinski is the Senior Vice President of Program Operations at Volunteers of America. Barbara has widespread expertise. It includes the establishment of housing for homeless veterans. She works directly with Volunteers of America's 36 affiliates to establish programs that fit the needs of their local communities. She's a certified social worker. She works closely with the Department of Veterans Affairs as part of the agency's partnership with Volunteers of America to provide homes and services to veterans all over the country. To her left, U.S. Army General Barry McCaffrey, no stranger to any of you here, former director of the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, a current NBC News analyst on national security and terrorism. General McCaffrey served as the Commander-in-Chief of U.S. Armed Forces Southern Command, coordinating national security operations in Latin America. He's had a distinguished military career, as you all knew. He served overseas for 13 years, completed 4 combat tours, including during Operation Desert Storm. At retirement from active duty, he was the most highly decorated 4-star general in the U.S. Army. He twice received the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest medal for valor, and was awarded 2 Silver Stars and 3 Purple Hearts. As director of the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, he served as a member of the President's Cabinet and the National Security Council for drug-related issues. General McCaffrey today is president of the consulting firm McCaffrey Associates. Finally, we've got, rounding off our panel, Betty Mosley Brown, Associate Director of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs Center for Women Veterans. Dr. Brown's passion for veterans began during her service in the Marine Corps. During her time in the military, she was a chaplain's assistant in Hawaii, a recruiter in Baltimore, a personal chief in San Diego. Military service also runs deep in her family. Her mother was an Army veteran. Her father retired from the Air Force. Dr. Brown started her career with the VA in San Diego, where she was a veterans benefits counselor and served as the Women's Veterans Coordinator. In 2004, she began her current position with the VA Center for Women Veterans. It was established to change the culture within the VA and better address the needs of the growing number of women who serve in the military. I've done nothing really to distinguish myself in the military realm, except that I married very well. My wife was ROTC at Princeton and a captain in the Army, serving in the JAG Corps, and my father-in-law was a nuclear submarine captain and worked for Admiral Rickover, and my father was in the Army, and I'm on television. Anyway, General McCaffrey, let me start with you. What are our veterans facing as they're coming home?
Well, first of all, Volunteers of America, thanks for including me and for having this panel and bringing attention to the issue. And I did put together some facts. I'll put them on my website, probably on yours, and they're an attempt to try and get numbers that might be correct. You know, I go to various sources. The most trusted source for me is the VA. But I've also taken into account other academic studies. Look, here we are, the longest war we've had in our country's history. Not since World War II have our serving troops faced anything like this. Some of them are on their 5th, 6th, 7th combat tours. We just introduced a Master Sergeant out in Colorado Springs at a group I talked to. He's on his 7th tour, been wounded twice. When they come home, they're the most battle-hardened, effective military force in the country's history, bar none. They're incredibly effective. They're doing well in life. The ones that have issues are being cared for by the VA. Rick Shinseki, also badly wounded in Vietnam. They've done magnificent work. Now, having said that, the suicide rate for these troops, which was generally speaking, over time, is always lower than their same age group in civilian life, is now double that. Their rates of unemployment are much higher than the national average. Their levels of homelessness are shocking. When we get them back, probably 20%, there's a sort of a rough number, have alcohol problems, the single biggest challenge we've got with the troops coming back. And then finally, some number, between 7 and 12%, probably also are encountering PTSD. Call it by any name you want: shell shock, battle fatigue, it's exposure to traumatic loss of your buddies, and personal emergency situation yourself, particularly on repetitive combat tours. Then finally, and I know Lee has done a tremendous amount of work with this, every war has signature injuries. Generally speaking, all of our casualties, and there's roughly 54,000 killed and wounded in Iraq and Afghanistan. If you're in a Marine Infantry Battalion, 10th Mountain Division, in some high-intensity conflict, you're running 20% of the battalion killed and wounded on a deployment. But generally speaking, our casualties all came from mortars and artillery. That's the deal. In these wars, it's IEDs. And, there's always a notion that it's sort of an occasional occurrence, but in fact, at the height of Iraq, we were running 3,000 a month. In Afghanistan, are running 1,300 or more a month. So if you're a National Guard military police soldier, if you're a logistics soldier, it's almost tended to erase the notion that overwhelmingly casualties only come from the infantry.
Dr. Brown, can I have you weigh in on this? Why? Why are we seeing what the general cites as statistics that seem to outpace previous conflicts?
Well, I am not a clinician, but I am passionate, just like Secretary Shinseki is, about making sure that those who have worn the uniform have the help that they need whenever they come home. I'm sure that you just heard recently about the 1,900 mental health employees that are going to come on to VA. So there will be 1,600 that will be clinicians in the mental health arena and 300 administrative staff for the full purpose to try to have VA staff there to help these mental health issues. One of the things that often happens is it's not the veteran that comes to VA, but it's a family member. And that's why over 300 vet centers are in our communities to actually be there for a veteran and their family members when they need help. The last thing I do want to say, while I have my time, I see the timekeeper there, is that there is a 20...
Don't worry, you know what, don't worry about the timekeeper. I'll monitor this.
You'll be my timekeeper,
I'll move the
okay.
conversation around.
All right.
Yeah.
I do want to mention about the 24/7 helpline, the crisis line for veterans. It's 1-800-273-TALK,
Okay.
where veterans or family members can
I want
call.
to come back to this. I don't want to cut you off at all, but I want to stick with a little bit of this question of why. Barbara, can you shed some light about why what we're seeing seems to be different than what we've seen before?
Yeah, I think there's a real difference between that Vietnam-era vet and that new, young OIF, OEF veteran. They access services in a different way. They act in a different way. They're in a different age group. They want to receive services in the way that they want to receive services. They want it more individualized. They don't want a lot of rigmarole. They don't want a lot of paperwork. And we have to help them. I think, as I go around the community and around the country, I see people thanking veterans in a very open and expressive way. And I think that's really a positive sign that we as a nation are moving in the direction of thanking veterans. But we really need to do more. It's not just thanking veterans. It's not what we say. It's what we do. Are we opening if we own a business, are we opening our businesses to those veterans? Are we hiring veterans as an organization? Do we make it a priority to be military friendly? It's not enough to say that we do good work. We have to do good work. And I think our communities have to become open to that and have to be more open to helping veterans and moving forward.
Lee, talk about your experience and the notion of more of these silent injuries.
Well, certainly they are the signature injuries. But I think one of the big things that you touched on, one of the big differences too, is less than 1% of our population serves over and over and over again. So unlike Vietnam, where it was democratic, where the boys down the street, in my street growing up, went to the war, we're asking these families to step up. And as General McCaffrey says, ultimately your number's going to be up if you've been deployed 4 times or 5 times. I met somebody who had been deployed 8 times, and finally he was hit by an ID. Of course he's going to be with the numbers. So what I see coming back and what I see so different because of the asymmetrical nature of an IED versus mortar fire, for example, or conventional warfare, is these injuries, as Bob's doctor said to me. Bob was injured 6 years ago, and I remember distinctly standing in launch stool and having his OR nurse say to me much later, we would meet so many people in his continuum of care so far down the road, it's been such an honor, have her say, first of all, in Vietnam, your husband never would have survived. And even 5 years ago, we would have taken somebody with your husband's grave injuries and quietly wheeled the gurney around the corner and let the Lord take him because we didn't have the medical technology that we have today. And because we can patch people up in ways that we couldn't before, and because we have incredible military medicine, we're bringing people back with these injuries in numbers that we didn't have to deal with at the VA before. And let's be honest, 6 years ago, we weren't prepared for these numbers. The VA has tricked up its game in really incredible ways. And as you all know, there's more to be done. There's always more to be done. But these numbers didn't exist in Vietnam.
General,
Well, one of the numbers that sticks in my mind, I think 12 in Vietnam, by the way, the scale of loss in Vietnam was immensely higher, just to keep that in the background. A lot of the problems we're seeing now are older Vietnam vets. We're the single biggest group of veterans, and it was 58,000 killed, 330,000 wounded. But the TBI equivalent, we're running around 10%, now it's around 22%. So it just underscores what Lee's saying. Military medicine, protective gear, MRAP vehicles, better leadership have come so far that we're being presented with some devastating injuries that now are chronic. So I think that's one of the new challenges. How do we organize ourselves as a society? I probably have the numbers slightly wrong. I sat at a table, the night of heroes, we bring in the Bethesda Walter Reed group, and this young kid, 6 years since he was blown up in Afghanistan, E4, 82nd Airborne, is clearly incapable of ever working again. A beautiful kid, they're living with her parents, but as she said, I think his check was $1,200 a month, which barely pays the cab fare for his weekly appointments at Bethesda. So we have to rethink those who have combination injuries, multiple amputations, TBI. How do we, and a lot of them are married, they've got dependent children. So how do we get that notion of care changed?
Well, and that's the question, Betty, which is how does the VA adapt? Can you talk a little bit about how you've stepped up your game and how you think about that longer term proposition of dealing with a combination of chronic injuries and just the changing face of need?
I think that changing face is really important because I remember back in 1978, whenever I first joined the military, and then in 92, whenever the military was really downsizing. And it was only during the 80s when they really started working, VA, DOD, and Department of Labor started working on the Transition Assistance Program to let service members know what their veterans benefits are. So we know now that we have to make that a faster, more mandatory process with DOD, which is happening. I mean, through eBenefits, which is our online 24/7 program where veterans can find out immediately the status of their claim, they can find out, they can change their address. Our veterans today are telling us they need immediate access. They are no longer going to wait on a toll-free number, be hung up on. We're trying to be on Flickr and Tweet and YouTube, and VA is trying to be more proactive and providing more accessible ways for veterans and their family members to find out information so they don't have that decade delay in coming to VA.
But Lee, the kind of public-private partnerships that have sprung up around foundations like yours and others who are reaching out to veterans seem to me to have changed a lot of this. What's the role that you try to play?
I think, as you said, these wars have dragged on, and how do we keep the spotlight on these families? Because it's so easy with less than 1% to have them completely slip into the sunset. And here, living in Washington, you see uniforms, you see the presence of the military, but I live in New York City. It is a big deal to see somebody in a uniform. It's a really big deal, and especially for the Guard and Reserve, who don't report back to a base, but go back to their community in Omaha and slip back to their jobs and jump every time a phone book drops. People don't understand what those issues are. So there is no way, let's be honest, there is no way the federal government is going to be able to handle these issues. And what a great country does is take care of its own. And so it is up to us. We got to sit here and go shopping. Well, less than 1% went over to serve in an area of conflict. Whether or not you believe in these wars, it is so not a political issue. It's simply an issue of what an evolved country does to care for those when they come back broken or injured. And the private, and thank you to Home Depot and to Volunteers of America and everybody else stepping in, because that's how we are going to solve
But
these issues.
take a family, take somebody who comes home and they've got I mean, it could be a combination of dealing, like Bob has had to deal with the result of a brain injury, maybe coupled with alcoholism or drug abuse or depression or any combination of these things. Where do some of the private foundations step in? Are they liaisons? Is that what you try to do? What other support?
Well, I'll speak for ours. In our foundation, what we do is quietly we will get individual names from a friend. You know, being apolitical, we can go to the Pentagon and very quietly say who's not making it and directly pay a mortgage or a bill. Now, we have to make sure they've run through every possibility and everything that they're owed through the channels of the military and benefits and so forth. There are, of course, building homes and folks that there's mentor programs in New York that are helping connect veterans to people that give them jobs. There are lots of unconventional ways, short of just completely handing a check over, that we can help these families. When people ask me, how can I help? I say, find these families in your town, bring a casserole over. Scrape together and get a manicure for that mom who's by a bedside 24/7 with a locked-in son. So there are lots of little ways, too, if you don't have the money to write the check.
I think there's a lot of little ways. We tend to work through both little ways and through larger means through the VA and public partnerships, and we have a lot of grant-funded programs through the Department of Labor and SSVF, and a number of programs working with veteran families. But I think part of it is what Lee said. I'm a mother of a child who now he's going to Afghanistan again this fall. It'll be his 3rd term. He's been blown up 3 times in IUDs. He has no visible injuries, but we don't really know what the long term is for him. He has a wife that's moved 3 times. There are a lot of things we can do for her. She's a licensed practical nurse. She's been in 3 different states. She's had to change her medical license 3 times at great expense to her on a military family salary. You know, we can do something about that. That's an advocacy issue we can take on. We can do that at reduced price. We can make it easy. She has to change her driver's license and her car registration every time they move. We can help them. We can give them free license fees. We can waive those kinds of things. We can make it possible for her to acclimate to a new community. She has to work in the private sector because she's never any place long enough to get into the VA system. I mean, there are a lot of families like this coming back, and she's now facing another deployment where her husband will be gone, my son will be gone for another 12 months, and she is just a microcosm. No one in my social circle, my friends, have a child that's serving in the military.
But this is look, you know, I've asked military leaders, my wife has asked military leaders, why don't we bring back the draft? And the answer that we get most often is, we don't want your draftees. We have the finest men and women in uniform now than we've ever had in the history of this country. They are professional, they are diplomatic, they are highly trained and educated. It's an all-volunteer force. The problem with that is that it becomes a more closed community to the rest of the country, General.
Well, there's several different ways of looking at that. You know, I take people, I was a company commander my 3rd combat tour in Vietnam. When you look at the armed forces, 1968, 14% were draftees. If you looked at my company, 100% were draftees, except the first sergeant and I. And both of us have been on 3 combat tours, been wounded 3 times. It's changed. But the draftees, we got to remind ourselves, they were terrific soldiers. We loved them. They were 19-year-old teenage boys. But now, if you talk to well, in those days, not too many girls. When you talk to them nowadays, you say, no, we don't want to return to those days. You know, they got 6 years service. They're just incredibly capable. There is one topic I'll sort of surface that's a little bit controversial. The 2nd biggest department of government is the VA. Thank God for the VA, without which we'd have a disaster with America's veterans. But there is an argument that was designed when we had 16 million people in uniform from World War II coming out of the service. Now it's all over the country. It's trying to respond and not be ripped off by the fakers out there. So it's a giant bureaucracy. There's an argument that we need to rethink how we provide services. Lee talked about the Guard and Reserve. Without them, we would have collapsed 2 years into the war. But now they're not in big cities like Omaha. They're in Bumscrew, North Dakota. No offense in North Dakota.
Or Bumscrew.
Or Bumscrew. And you know, there's an argument that we ought to be giving our veterans a health care card that they can take to providers, mental health,
Yeah.
orthopedic surgery, you name it, where they live. But that's
Well, but it does raise the
politically-
question, Betty, which is, is it possible, is VA evolving fast enough? I mean, getting on social media in 2012, I mean, that's great, but, the scale that you face, the dispersion that you face, I mean, can government do this well enough?
Well, I can tell you that, out of the 157 VA medical centers and 57 regional offices and the community-based outreach clinics, I mean, they are trying to be out in the communities, especially for women veterans. Women
Yeah.
veterans are coming to VA double the rate that they were in 2000. And I was surprised to see when we say that statistic, we think, oh, it's, well, our younger women. But really, it's women my age, 45 to 65, who are using VA healthcare at a larger pace. So the word is slowly getting out that VA is a great place for the best care anywhere, but there's still a lot of veterans, both male and female, that do not use VA services. So
Indict the VA. I think they're doing a great job. I think it's too big a job. I think it's a public-private partnership. I think it's going to take all of us. It takes the nonprofits. It takes the foundations. It takes citizens. We're all going to have to do it and help VA and do our part and let them do their part.
But Colin Powell used to tell us, smart people in Washington don't fight about policy, they fight about money. And at the end of the day, you got to have resources to make these services work. So again, I would sort of tee up the notion that at some point, we got to consider that the veteran gets a health care card that he can use in this most sophisticated medical system on the face of the earth, here in the United States. Instead of just saying, well, you're 20% disabled, here's your VA package, go find a...
Go ahead, Lee.
Well, this is such a passion for me because I think there's an easy place to start, and it's with brain injuries, because the brain injury is not an amputation, it is not a surgery in which you can recover in a short-ish period of time. This is a long-term road, and what I see happening is in the 4 centers of excellence in the VA for TBI, you are breaking families up because you're asking that mother who works at Walmart in Bumscrew, North Dakota, to figure out who's going to hold her job, who's going to take care of her 3 kids, and how does she go motivate her husband to heal by a bedside for probably 2 years. And there's right there in Bumscrew a fabulous rehab center that has been, once you get out of the acute care situation, has been dealing with car accidents and trauma and head injuries for years. And that veteran has access to it, but only if they're smart and cagey and old enough like me to know that, and only if they know how to fight like hell in the hallway and go through the paperwork and kick that door down. Because it's really not, no offense here at all to the VA, but it is not in the VA's benefit and interest to send those veterans to private places. And that has to change, and we can start with brain injuries because that's an easy area to carve out and a very long-term heal.
Lee, you are correct. And what we need to do is make sure that families know that there are case managers that will help get that service to where they need it to be, closer to home. There's many alternatives that social workers are trying to do at VA to make that connection. I remember back in when the wars first started, we used the term seamless transition because we knew that once they were injured, we didn't have time to wait for them to come to VA. So VA was actually at the bedside at Walter Reed and Bethesda to help make that transition much easier. Although the system may not look like that, we have really increased the number of case managers to help make that knowledge more seamless. I hate to keep using that word, but it really needs to be seamless so that they know that it's either a military provider and then it's a VA provider, or it may be a civilian provider. But whatever it is, it needs to be the best care, the fastest care for them.
Barbara, can you, in the general, speak to another aspect of this, which is a return, even despite injury or in the absence of a major injury, reintegration into some kind of meaningful civilian life. There's that very powerful scene in the film The Pacific when he returns from Japan and he's at a job fair and the woman says, "What do you know how to do?" And he says, "I know how to kill Japs." And, it was obviously in the vernacular of returning servicemen at that time after being in Japan, but also pointed up the fact that a lot of our veterans today struggle with, well, what am I going to do?
Yeah, I think they're returning certainly to a tough economy, but that's certainly been our role in Volunteers of America. We see ourselves as those persons, and I'm a social worker at heart, and am a social worker, and see ourselves as ability to translate. Help that veteran understand what's happening in the civilian economy today, try to match up his skills from his military service and his MOS, and how does that translate. Be a guide. You know, I hear from veterans all the time, they say, or their families, he's not the same, or she is not the same. And no, they aren't. Time has passed. Experience has made them different. The things that they've seen has made them different. And the economy is different from when they left. So somebody has to help them make that transition, and that's the role of the social workers, the role of the private agencies that are working on employment, being able to translate that. I know when my son comes home, it takes him a few days to reacclimate to talking to us in the way that we understand what has happened to him. I sometimes struggle with the jargon. And I think we need to know that as workers with this population. We need to help them translate what they're seeing into the civilian job employment market. We need to have more people step up and say, we value that teamwork that they've learned, that ability to work together and stay on task, to be a leader, to move forward. Those are important skills. That's what I want as a worker. I want someone who will stick to the job and do it and work hard at it. And I think we are so hung up sometimes on translating strictly, well, he was this, he drove a truck, so he's going to drive a truck over here. Well, he got the supplies of a multi-million-dollar army to the logistical point where people needed them. I mean, we can count on that person. So I think that's what the kinds of translation that we need to be doing with our veterans.
General, there's so much more bottom-up leadership in the military today, particularly in forward combat situations. What's your experience in the last couple of years with what the private sector is doing? I know NBC and Tom Brokaw has been very involved in work getting our returning heroes employed. There's a big job fair just a couple of days ago up in New York in this area. Is there a different level of awareness about this in the private sector, and are the efforts paying off?
Well, I think there is. Look, you know, you started off, the last slide I show in every lecture I give is, I call it a bad news slide for democracy. It talks about how much trust the American people have in the great institutions of our society. And it's terrible. Congress is down around 9–12%. The most respected institution, bar none, for over a decade is the armed forces. It's because these kids are writing their mom and dad and saying, we're in an institution of integrity and courage, and they care about me as a person. I think 80% of the veterans come home strengthened by their combat exposure, grateful to God that they're not afraid of the police. They've got hot water when they take a shower. They're living in this society. So I think when you start with problems, one of the great things about Volunteers of America, when you start with problems, you want to hunt zebras, go to the water hole. We got to focus on America's homeless veterans, their unemployed veterans, those with severe PTSD. By the way, PTSD, generally speaking, is an adjustment problem, and a year later, you're okay. You stop drinking booze to excess, having fights with your 20-year-old wife, etc. But we got to focus on TBI. Doesn't go away without extended care. So focus on the problems up front, and I think, of course, that's what VA has done. Thank God for VA, but I don't see how a federal institution alone is adequate, particularly since we've engaged the Reserve and the Guard from the start of this war, and they're all over America's communities. So at some point, I just pray we can get through the politics of it and let access to the healthcare system be done through some other program.
Yeah, you want to talk about the private sector aspect?
I do. I want to talk about our partnership. You know, VA couldn't be what VA does without the veteran service organizations, without the many faith-based organizations, because it really is a partnership. I want to take you to a new site that's on the VA website regarding employment, because we know there's a lot of issues from homelessness to mental health issues that if you're employed, it may change your outlook on life. So back in January, there was a big career fair here in the Washington, D.C. area with thousands of veterans just to come in. So we partnered with other federal agencies and civilian agencies, and were able to hire over 500 veterans from that one day. We're trying to do it again. We are doing it again in the end part of June in Detroit, a free career fair with folks, with employees, with organizations, employers that have jobs to give. And that's what veterans really need and want. So we have boosted our website, because I was glad to hear you say about your job career. You know, in the military, you're used to saying, well, this is my MOS, this is my military occupational specialty. But we don't know how that translates. There is a website called VA for vets at va.gov. And if you go on there, you can actually get personal coaching on how to translate whatever that 4-digit code was in the military to the civilian world. It's also connected with the federal job site that will allow you to see what jobs are available throughout the United States that have translated what you did in the military to a federal job. I mean, isn't that what it's about, making it easier for our veterans, and then to have one-on-one coaching if that's necessary. So the site just came up, but you can easily find it, vaforvets.va.gov.
Let me mention one other thing that goes along with that. I'm on the board of directors of the National Drug Court Association. We get almost 3,000 drug courts around the country, phenomenally effective, taking people at the bottom of their life, and a year later they're in recovery. And they're not behind bars for 5 years for grand larceny. And we just started the Veterans Treatment Courts, and now we're up around 90 of them. Judge Russell up in Buffalo, New York was the first one. They're all over the country. We get a lot of these young troops from all the services who get busted for drunk driving or assault and battery, or you name it, to include some low-level violent crimes. And if we get them in these treatment courts, we can turn it around and save them from another 15 years of in and out of the criminal justice system. So just another thing for you to know about. You can go up and find NADCP, I think is their...
Yeah, incarcerated veterans are certainly something that's just a sad phenomenon. You know, we certainly don't want to be dealing with this population, and I think the Veterans Diversion Courts certainly are helping with that process, so we're not putting our heroes away. But those who have been have a double strike. They're a veteran, they have little opportunity, and they have even less coming out of the criminal justice system. So anything we can do to avoid that and divert is a step in the right direction. I also want to just focus just a minute on that small minority of populations that Lee was talking about, you know, who may, and the General was talking about, who may never work again. You know, we have an opportunity to step up with the partner with the VA and do a partnership. You know, we have a vision in Volunteers America that we'd like to open Heroes Ranch and the urban version. We'd like to do them around the country, around the centers of excellence, so that family can be together, that there is long-term care opportunities for that family, that children. And if they can't live at home again, let's have them living in a place where it is a wonderful place for people to live, for families to visit and be involved in. But it's a small minority, but I think it's a minority of people that we never would have seen in previous wars. Right. They wouldn't have survived.
And because it's a small minority, there are so many things that we can do. There are things that we're really not talking enough about. And if you are a mother, which so many of the caregivers are, because these boys are so young, and girls, but most of the severely injured I have met who have been young men, and that's just a statistical fact, they don't get, the mothers, as I understand it, aren't entitled to the benefits the way a wife would be. So that the sacrifices made by parents of their children, it's a much more often grueling financial situation. I met one mother recently whose possessions are in 7 different pods and who had to sell her home. And her child is unable to work. He's a young man, 22 years old. We've all heard these stories, and I have the great honor of meeting many of these families as I travel around. There's another issue that, again, because it's a small minority of people, I think we can do a much better job of helping, and it's the story that no one wants to talk about in this war, and that's the story of intimacy. the 24-year-old boy who rolled up to me in his wheelchair and said, Mrs. Woodruff, what girls ever want to go home, you know, from a bar with me? And there are his best years of his life where somebody like David Gregory was going knucklehead nuts in the bars, and we know this happened, right? Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, where'd that go?
Wow.
Really? Yeah. I've heard all those stories over at ABC. I love to make him blush, by the way.
Let's just focus on the issues at hand, shall we?
Well, it was getting a little serious, so I had to throw it back to him.
there you
But
go.
here are these young men who, in the best years of their life, should be out having a great old time. And they have been robbed of that. And this is the issue nobody wants to talk about, address. There's a wonderful group that started up at Bethesda with a number of the wives I know, but it's quiet, and it's the dirty little secret about this war.
I just wonder, Barbara, about, you know, these are issues that are going to persist in any conflict. And in many ways, it seems to me, just because of the proliferation of media, these get more coverage now. And I don't know, maybe you all can say better than I can about compared to, say, the Vietnam era. But I remember watching a story with my daughter, who's 6, about a returning veteran who had severe physical injuries and then had really gone down a hole of drinking and depression. And you know, she had this incredible compassion for him and wrote a little story based on him and talked about it in school. Where, I mean, to Lee's point about issues like intimacy and their marriages beyond that and holding those together, depression, alcoholism, all flowing out of injuries, you know, that are more silent or more obvious. How effective is the safety net for them in our communities?
Well, I think it's an issue that continues to emerge. We certainly have to make sure we use every VA resource. Mm-hmm. We certainly have vet centers in almost every community who are staffed by vets. And, you know, vet to vet is a really powerful mechanism. We specialize a lot in Volunteers America of hiring veterans within our programs because they understand, they've been there. They don't have to say, I can't say I've been there. I've only done it vicariously and through my son. But I have met many veterans, and vet to vet is powerful. So that mentoring is something that we can find in every community. That doesn't cost anything. There are 23 million veterans in this country. We can match them up, and they can step forward and do that. But I think counseling resources are not as plentiful as we need. And they're not necessarily geared to what that veteran has seen. The average veteran has seen things, who served in these combat roles, have seen things that ordinary people don't. They've seen their buddies blown up. They've seen body parts. They've seen things that cause trauma. And as the general said, you know, it would be not possible for anyone to not have some sort of a reaction to that. Trauma is trauma. You've seen it. But how we get over that and how we have the ability to bridge that, to say to that veteran, it's perfectly normal if you feel this way.
Sure.
It's only when that becomes a prolonged and causing them to spiral downward that it's an issue. So counseling in early and often and understanding that that is a typical reaction to trauma is important.
Barry, do you notice a difference between our veterans today of this generation and their ability to speak about these things as opposed to, you know, the greatest generation that Brokaw wrote about, where so many men went off to war and they came home and they didn't talk about it?
Well, that's a good point. You know, my dad was a World War II veteran, 9 years in combat in 3 wars, and my father-in-law was, and all my uncles, and you couldn't get them with a barge pole to get them to talk about the incredible. I didn't realize my father-in-law had 3 combat jumps in World War II. We found out just before he died. And you can't get us as Vietnam vets to shut up, for God's sakes, about the whole thing.
Because you, especially, are so in touch with your feelings. That's what everybody says about you.
But let me mention one point that's always concerned me. Thank God for the Volunteers of America and the other good people around the country who have reached out to these veterans in a variety of ways, particularly with jobs. You know, jobs don't come from the federal government. They come from some guy with 70 employees. But having said that, I'm always nervous. We've got, again, 54,000 killed and wounded. We need to take care of those kids, along with those with PTSD, TBI, and other issues. And we're not doing them a favor, and I don't want it to be a subject of Volunteers of America. We owe them care long term. I got shot as a company commander. There were 23 wounded that day, 4 killed. One of my young soldiers got hit by a machine gun right through behind both eyes, horribly disfigured his face, blew out his eyes. In the ensuing, 40-some odd years now, he's gotten married, had children, became a master carpenter, a master motorcycle mechanic, and it was the VA sister that gave him those programs. But he needed a wife who was smart enough to figure out that system. He doesn't live near a VA hospital. So again, back to the task at hand, we do want a federal agency with the resources and the manpower to provide services. We're not doing them a favor, we owe it to them.
Do we have the resources? I mean, we're in a time in Washington, as the general said, of fighting over money to an incredible degree. We have mandatory cuts to the Defense Department that are looking Congress in the face at the end of the year. Are we prepared financially as a government to deal with emerging needs?
I think the President and the Secretary have really put this need in front of them just by hiring, like a couple weeks ago, the mental health providers. They see a need and they're putting that money where it needs to be. We have a long way to go. There are still veterans who have never come to VA that need to know what is available at VA. So what were to happen tomorrow if all veterans, all 22+ million, came to VA? It would be an overloaded system even more than it is now. So we do have to really ramp up because we do give good care and we need to make sure that that gets out.
I have a question about the military culture within the military today, not just the VA. I've spoken to military leaders who say, part of our challenge is that as our veterans come home, the public face of our armed services become these individuals who are out in the communities, those who are struggling and those who are incredibly successful. But it moves from the combat theater back here to local communities, and that becomes a very big challenge for the military as it realizes this is our public face now. How does, as an institution, how does the military deal with that, Barbara?
I don't know, but I can tell you from the veterans that I see, whether they're ill, whether they're infirm, whether they have any kind of injuries, they're a tremendous representative for our country. They believe in our country, they fought for our country, despite what other people have said about these wars are unpopular, they think they do a great job. I'm proud of my son and I'm proud of the people that served with him. So I can't help but think that our communities will respond to that. They'll respond to our young people, our people in need. I don't think they'll wait, and I don't think they'll wane in their enthusiasm for meeting the challenges in our country. It's just who we are. And I think our young people who are coming back from the military in large numbers now are going to make us do that. They're going to ask us to do that.
General, do you have a sense of how the military itself is thinking about this with active duty soldiers, but also understanding how they're being represented back here at home?
Well, probably the least effective thing we do in the armed forces is public affairs. It's just astonishing how bad we are at it. Having said that, there's always an argument, the 1%, the isolated. Mike Mullen started talking about the, disentanglement of the American people from the armed forces. I'm not convinced of that at all. 7% of this country are veterans. They all got families. We started with the numbers that 79%, tremendous amount of trust in U.S. Armed Forces. I don't think the armed forces are isolated at all. I think when they appear in uniform anywhere in the country, Guard, Reserve, active, 2.4 million people in the Department of Defense currently. This is a huge institution with tremendous trust by the American people. So again, I think the problems there are, we've had them, and by the way, it's the smallest army, active army, since 1939. So we've burdened it excessively. There's been a sort of an open-ended warrant on requirements on them. They've handled it pretty magnificently, but now as they come out of the war, and we're about to wind this thing down here in the next 2 years, once the election's over, we'll come out in 18 months. Now we got to reset the military, and we got to take care of our veterans. But it's a responsibility of all of us, the American people, to do that. And I don't think we're organized properly. I do think at some point we got to consider letting this huge healthcare industry deal with the veterans directly instead of telling them go to the VA only.
I think we should open this up a little bit and get some questions from the floor. We've had a good opportunity to talk. Mike, tell me again how we've got microphones strategically located throughout the.
Good morning. My name is Christy Kaufman. I'm a 11-year Army wife and Executive Director of the Code of Support Foundation, and we're dedicated to try to bridge that gap between civilian and military America. I just walked in because I had another meeting, but I wanted to make sure under discussion was the impact on the families, particularly mental health. We talk a lot about the service member suicide and the veteran suicides that we're seeing, but I will tell you from firsthand experience in what we're dealing with, I personally know 3 Army wives that have taken their own lives. So as we approach suicide prevention and mental health in general, I think it's really important that we not just involve the families, but the community, because as the General said, even if everything in the DoD and the VA were working perfectly, and we know it's not, but even if it were, we don't have the resources, or more importantly, the culture, for that matter, to take care of this level of need after 10 years of war.
Can I ask you, where does the breakdown occur? I mean, we can all imagine financial hardship, you know, the physical aspect of being a caregiver. What other light can you shed on where that breakdown occurs that you, whether it's interfacing with the VA or other organizations that could help, where, you know, women that you've known have taken their lives?
You know, it's difficult with suicide. It's a very individual,
Sure.
you know, case-by-case basis. But I would say that part of the breakdown is the stigma. And I would argue that the stigma on the wife side is just as prevalent, particularly when you're talking about NCO and career officers' wives. I mean, we're really kind of in that stiff upper lip, put your big girl panties on and deal with it, which you have to be in during the deployments, but doing that for 10 years, and I think that's the defining difference of these wars, is having to do that over and over again. Like, the best analogy I can come up with is for civilians is when you're driving on a freeway and you see that cop car in the rearview mirror and you get that feeling right here.
Yeah.
It's like having that feeling for 10 years. Because you're worried when they're gone, you're dealing with what they come out with, and my girlfriends that are dealing with the PTS and TBI 5 to 7 years post in the veteran community are really struggling as well. I think there's a sense of isolation as well. I feel like DoD and the VA at the top levels have bought in. It has not gotten down to the lower levels. And I think in the implementation part of it, you hear policies that are being developed and all that great stuff, but when it actually gets down to the grassroots, people are not having that experience. And that's a shame, because what happens is you get this almost cognitive dissonance. You get all this great stuff happening up here, and then on the ground, that's not your experience, and people are plugging out when we need them to plug in. So it's something that we need to address.
Thank you for your sacrifice and for being so well spoken about this. Comment here from anyone?
I just want to say that
Yeah.
maybe we can put some of our resources that aren't necessarily wide out there on the web, maybe to Volunteers of America, so on your website, so that we can share the information. Because you're right, there's a lot of great things that are happening, but it doesn't help if it's not getting to the people that need it.
And that spouse, I think, you know, as Lee is an example, an advocate for her husband, they are their husbands and spouses' strongest advocates, and it's a tough role.
Well, and that's just what I was going to say to second that. There is nothing more isolating than being a caregiver. And being a caregiver of somebody who's very impaired with a TBI is absolutely the scariest thing in the world, especially if they've been your primary breadwinner, because your biggest job is to preserve their dignity. And that's usually at the cost to yourself as the wife. And so as the wife, you're taking the brunt of everything, correct? You're taking the anger, the frustration, the bad stuff. As Oprah says, we always put our good china out for the guests, and we save everything, the chipped stuff, for home. And that's incredibly isolating. And we need to reach down, because The other big difference is that these families that we're talking about tend to be in more rural areas in the aggregate. They tend to be more in the South, the Midwest, Texas. So they're not in more sophisticated cities where the healthcare system is and the social work and the mental health. So we need to help them.
You know, let me just underscore that this great Army wife just said too, without overstating it. You know, if you're at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and your spouse is in the 82nd Airborne, and they've been deployed almost continuously for 10 years. Every week, the bodies come home, and the wounded in action go into the post-hospital. And it's gone on for almost a half generation now. So it's different. We have not seen it. And by the way, that military family at Fort Bragg or Camp Lejeune or wherever at least has an institution around them. But if you're in a National Guard division, and you're on your second deployment, it's quite different. So this is unlike anything we faced before since World War II. World War II, same thing. The country was at war, though, not just your family.
And I've always wondered about, in World War II, when you were deployed, were you effectively gone the whole time?
Look, Vietnam, you know, we just disappeared from sight. You handed letters to a helicopter pilot that would eventually get home, and 2 months later you get an answer. But World War II, my mother talks about leaving Fort Huachuca with 2 little kids, riding trains to get back to Massachusetts, and you know, no hotel rooms, and everywhere they went they'd say, "Lady, don't you know there's a war on?" Because the country was at war, and that's no longer the case.
I just want to talk briefly about some resources. Lee, when you were talking about the support for caregivers, VA does have a caregiver program that actually gives the finances directly to the caregiver. So that's one thing that helps. It probably doesn't settle everything. And when you were talking about spouses, the one thing we've been trying to do at VA is really work with clergy, rabbis, pastors, imams, because when people are stressed, they go to what's familiar. And so we've been trying to work with clergy to educate them on signs and symptoms and to make it okay. Right now, if I told you guys I had to leave to go for chemotherapy or dialysis, everybody would be like, well, can I help you? What can I do for you? If I told you I had to go see my therapist because I deal with depression, you'd be like, I don't think I'm going to go to lunch with her. I thought about it. You know, and so we try to make it safe. We try to make it be okay with mental health things, but it's really not. And so we're trying to educate clergy and faith-based communities to understand what it is and then to say it's okay. And we're also trying to educate them to look for the signs and symptoms. Because I'm a nurse. I worked in ERs. Rarely did people come in and tell me they're going to commit suicide. But I learned to look for signs and symptoms, even when they looked like they had it all together, to say, okay, we need to call psych down. So we're trying to educate the faith community and the nonprofit communities where people and their families go when they need help to look at these things, which in the past we've not done.
Can I just underscore that?
The most effective person to find a suicide is that military wife. She knows the signs and symptoms. That family member, she knows the changes.
Can I just quickly underscore one? I mean, I think this is a role for the media too. To your point, how do we keep talking about the fact that there is depression, there are feelings of worthlessness, there is stress, there's anxiety, and that all of that is okay, and in fact, totally normal, because one thing, I mean, again, I have these conversations with my children, well, this person has a problem in their minds, and this is why, and make this a more accessible conversation so that we get this to be much more mainstream so that people will say, sure, I'll have lunch with you. Go ahead.
My name is Max Harris, and I'm an Iraq veteran, and also I run the website combatveteranswithptsd.com. First off, I wanted to thank the Army spouse. My wife has dealt with a lot of this, and I know that for her this has been a very particularly large struggle for her. The big thing that I see that's missing, and why I think you don't see as many folks coming to the VA as the numbers indicate have that available to them, is because of the stigma associated with PTSD. I can tell you that there are thousands of guys out there that I see through my website, through the Facebook page, through Twitter, that talk to me because it's anonymous. That is the portion of this, and that's the piece that we're missing, is that To give you an example, there is a website called bigwhitewall.com over in Britain that was funded by Help Our Heroes, was funded with over £6 million to make sure that this for-profit service of online anonymous peer-to-peer support was free for all of the British veterans. We have the social media accessible to us. My question is what are the agencies going to do to make sure that the outreach is made to those people who want help, don't know how to get it, or are afraid to leave their homes? How do you get to those people? Because there's thousands of us out there. I'm lucky I had support. I come from a fourth-generation military family. What about those guys that don't have that? And that's what I want to know, what the VA, what the VOA, what other private institutions are going to do to bridge the gaps.
I think there's a lot of effective techniques, but I think one is, again, hiring veterans. We do outreach on the streets. We're going to unconventional places. We're finding women veterans who often turn up in domestic violence shelters rather than at our doorstep for services. And once they have trust and maintain trust, you can connect them to the VA, to the wonderful services that are being provided for women veterans. But it's a matter of trust. Who do they trust? How can we come forward? How do we know? It's not, we're not forcing anybody to do anything, but provide a safe opportunity for people to tell their stories, to be safe, to know that they're not going to be judged, and that what they say is not going to make a difference between whether we serve them or not. There's no problem that's so terrible that somebody can't listen to with empathy and begin that healing process, because that's what healing is. It's a process.
And I think to David's point, education, 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 because I've talked to so many families who don't get it. What they see is you, a totally able-bodied person. There's nothing wrong with him. Why can't he go out and get a job? And because they don't understand, because of the stigma, right? No one wants to say, my son is mentally ill. And we have such a problem saying the words mental illness, and mental illness is just as real as a physical illness. But because there's no manifestation, we need to you can keep the focus on the stories. And it's the individual stories that touch us, just like it touched your daughter.
Right.
We need to keep telling those stories.
Do you think that in your foundation and others, is there a model there that's sustainable over time that can be the bridge? Because I think part of his point is, again, there will be limits to what government agencies can do on this scale and with kind of evolving need. And this is the beauty of public-private partnerships when they work.
Well, and what we do just as our own foundation is we're not ever going to pretend to reinvent the wheel or come up with a model, because what we've learned is the model keeps changing. The issues keep changing. For us this year, it's suicide prevention and reemployment. So by taking dollars, by keeping the issue focused on our veterans, and taking dollars in, what we do a lot of similar things to you in terms of we make grants to small grassroots organizations around this country who've already invented the wheel, who maybe have their own white wall in wherever it is, Tallahassee or whatever. And so if we as private citizens can continue to keep the dollars flowing to these groups on the ground that get it, that are dealing with their 10 vets in Rochester in the homeless shelter, pulling those vets out of bridges and under tunnels and helping them with mental illness issues, then we take the dollars in one big funnel and we continue to move the lens. Now, how that lens gets moved is another issue.
I wonder if anybody knows this. I'm curious, based on what you're saying, whether a company, say like Google, has leveraged its platform around this area of need. Look what they've done for organ donation, what they've sought out to do. Excuse me, Facebook.
David, I can comment to that coincidentally. First of all, thank all of you for your service, and thanks to all of you and your families who sacrificed so much for our country. Coincidentally, I'm here with the public-private partnership, and we've been working for about a year. It's called the Anthem Project, and basically what we're doing is listening to the needs of veterans, starting from homelessness all the way through education, healthcare, TBI, PTSD, and everything, putting everything they need all in one physical campus. We're fully funded. So we went to the VA senior leadership some time ago, and they said, great, we think this is really amazing, but we don't know what box to put you in. That's, that was a quote from them. So we've been working for the past year to try to get government to think about the way we deliver services outside of this box. So I'm here to ask you your advice about public-private partnerships and using Congress or any other means to encourage the VA to continue to pursue those policies so that we can do our fair share to try to help these brave men and women.
Any thoughts?
Anyone?
Well, my central skill set, I tell people, is tricking the federal government into doing the right thing. So I'd be glad to help you. It's a, you know, you sit here inside the Beltway, and it's a never-ending battle trying to focus on the most important person in town is the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, not the President of the United States. And you go over there, and you know, 13 subcommittees, and 13 bills, and how do you identify resources that you're going to funnel to the person you want to get it in VA and then through them to you? Oh, my God. You know, I'd rather deal with the Russian Navy than the federal government.
But one of the things, General, don't you think it's true? I mean, I think that whether it's, you know, big social media companies or a lot of corporations that have gotten into the idea of helping veterans get jobs, whether they're banks or Comcast or whatever, I do think that there's a greater expectation in the private sector among people who work for these companies that they have a sense of purpose and civic identity to get involved in these projects, which can make, I mean, the private sector can lead the way in such an important fashion, at least to partner, to do things when you start to run up against the limits of what the federal government can do, or local, state government can do.
Yeah, I agree. I think at the end of the day, jobs don't come from the federal government. You have to have the great corporations of America do something about it.
And
a lot of them.
If I can just add, and I think that's where VA for Vets is going. So right now it's starting with federal government because those are the jobs that we have access to, that we're connected to. But we get calls all the time throughout all VAs as organizations in the community that say, I just want to hire a veteran. So let's get these together.
Right,
let's be that link.
Sure.
I also, before I leave this, I wanted to say that there is a mental health app, because we know that you shouldn't have to serve in silence. And a lot of veterans will be at home and look for resources, and right on an iPhone or an Android, you know, there is a downloadable post-traumatic stress app to help to maneuver and to see the resources and to try to help that veteran. So
And just one last point to this gentleman, I think it's fidelity of mission. As Mike said, we've been in this business working with veterans since World War I. You know, we got to keep doing it. We're not doing the same things we did in World War I as we're doing now. The mission changes, the situation changes, but it really is fidelity to cause, and keep at it. Good luck.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for a really thought-provoking panel, and thanks to Volunteers of America for presenting this and for all the comments that there have been. I'm Donna Butts, I'm with Generations United, and I wanted to ask you about a generation that we haven't talked about, and that has to do with the first young woman who was killed in Iraq was a single mother, and her son is now being raised by her parents, his grandparents. And so what we've talked about family and the role of family, but haven't really touched on what we can do to support grandparents who are another generation that are providing care, providing support, and they're stepping in there when there's multiple deployments, when families are away, to really help to take care of our country's children.
Well, I tell you, that's been a huge problem. We've got all sorts of dual military service families. They're supposed to have family care plans. That worked for one deployment, then it unraveled. And so all across the country, and again, even more so in the Guard and Reserve, it's hard to tell what's really going on out there. But a lot of grandparents are involved in it. Sometimes it's a next-door neighbor, for God's sakes, that you're leaving an infant, year-old baby with. And I don't think the institution is prepared to deal with it as they are with a spouse, with a power of attorney, with a military ID card, et cetera. You put your finger on a huge, significant problem. This isn't unusual. This is commonplace. 14% of the armed forces now are women. I just saw the numbers. It's a surprising number, like 800 are killed and wounded. So they're out there in the battlefield. They're also doing multiple combat tours. And in many cases, based on our society, they remain the primary caregiver for their own children.
I can tell you from the Center for Women Veterans that we talk to a lot of female veterans who not only have children, but also grandparents and parents who are taking care of those children. So different initiatives like having pilot programs for child care at different VA facilities, that is really helping that veteran, whatever era they are, to be able to come make their appointments and to get the care. So although it may be something that on the forefront looks like it's only helping women veterans, when you look at the larger picture, it's helping all veterans.
I got to tell my favorite story, David. My daughter was a major in the Washington State National Guard, 5 years on active duty, and very precocious 6-year-old grandson knew that mother was a soldier because he'd see her going out the door wearing camouflage uniform. He knew that every summer she'd get 2 weeks active duty for training, and my wife would show up to run Camp Nana for 2 weeks in Seattle. But this is a true story now. A couple years ago, she asked him, what do you want to be for Halloween? And she said, you want to be Spider-Man, because he knows that Granddad and Spider-Man are like that from my drug czar days. You want to be an athlete? You want to be a soldier? And he goes, soldier? Mom, I'm a boy.
That's great. Please, yes.
Hi, my name is Kimberly Washington. I'm a vet. So everything that y'all have spoke on today, we can further elaborate. I am now a Veterans Liaison with Volunteers of America. My issue with the VA right now, I was injured. When you put in your claim and your claim comes back and it says you are disabled this percent for this percent for this percent for this. When you go see that doctor does not specialize in your injury. So for instance, me, I have a back injury. I saw a general doctor. He saw me all of 5 minutes. So part of what everybody has said, when this gentleman said that they don't want to go to the VA because it's not just you're not being identified or the system is so hard to get through, it's that the doctors aren't necessarily those doctors that specialize in your injury. So you're going to see a doctor that may or may not even want to see you for 5 minutes. And then their caseload is so overwhelming, they don't really have the time. So what are we doing to help those veterans? Because now I'm in a position and I'm trying to get those veterans to fill out their claims. And I have to convince them that once they fill out their claim, that they're going to be seen in a timely manner. And then they're going to be seen by the proper person. So now you're putting people in places. And the other thing is I worked for the WTU at Fort Dix for 4 years. So I was a family representative, and I saw those soldiers that didn't want to be identified, or I saw those families that were saying, I can't get my soldier to even answer the phone now. So, and those case managers there at Fort Dix, some of them are just burnt out, and they're doing the same thing that the doctors are doing. They don't want, I don't have time. 4:30, they out the door. If they're not here, they don't have the time to see them. And some of those soldiers, by the time they open up, it's after 4:30. So what do you do?
What we need to get out is that at every VA medical facility, there is a patient advocate. So if you feel that 10 minutes or whatever that time is not sufficient, you need to connect with the patient advocate. But you as a female veteran, as a woman veteran, you have another person, another advocate. You have a woman veteran program manager at each of our VA medical facilities. At our VA regional offices, there are women veteran coordinators to help you to process your claim and to know what to put on the claim so that it can be processed in a timely manner. If for some reason that's not happening for you, there is a Center for Women Veterans. Have you ever called me?
No, I haven't.
All right. But we're one center in Washington, but we can possibly help to get that link in your local facility.
What are we going to do for the male soldiers that have the same issue? And theirs is more prevalent than just women.
But we can also connect all veterans with the right person in the local facility that can help them. I know that even though we're in Washington, I mean, we're there because of our veterans. We're there to serve you. So afterward, we'll exchange numbers, and we'll make sure that, you know, in the Philadelphia area, that you have the right links that can help you through the process.
But you raise a wonderful question.
Your advocacy people, they need to return phone calls. They're not.
You're absolutely correct.
And whether it's not enough people in that office, because I've spoken to them several times, well, not just my issues, but other soldiers' issues. And sometimes this is 8:30 in the morning.
Yes.
And they don't even want to respond.
So there are some issues that have to be discussed one-on-one, and we need you to get to someone who can answer the phone and answer your question.
But I think the other issue that she raises that's really important to me, we do have to care for our caregivers. People can get burned out. It's overwhelming sometimes, the work that's being done. And it doesn't excuse people from not answering people, but we need to also recognize that it takes caregivers, it takes a toll on them. Our professional social workers need to be tended to as well, so that they don't give the kind of response that you're talking to, and they don't become overwhelmed, and they do get rotated through the system. So there is a real kernel of something that we all need to be aware of, that it's a tough job, and people need to have the kinds of supports to continue to do their job well.
It is, and we are trying to do a cultural transformation within VA, especially regarding our women veterans. I don't know if you saw the campaign recently on our VA main website, but it was a young lady, maybe in her 20s, looking very innocent, sitting in a chair, and above her head it said, "Please don't call me Mr." So if whenever you go into a facility and you're a female, you've served your country, and you're being called Mr. So-and-so, I mean, right there, you're thinking, well, this isn't a place for me. So we're trying to get the word out, we're trying to provide training, we're trying to let all of our VA staff know that no matter who walks through the door, no matter what clothes they're in, assume that they are a veteran. Reach out to them, make them feel special because of the service that they did for their country. Then if you find that it's not a veteran, it's a veteran advocate, or it's someone from the community, that's all right. They still deserve top-notch care and information no matter who they are.
I think we want to try to get to a few more questions. Go ahead, Mike. Yep.
Good morning. Thanks so much for the panel. It's wonderful that we're focusing on this. My name is Matt DeFranti. I'm with Rebuilding Together. We repair homes for veterans and low-income families so they can stay in their homes and stay self-sufficient. My question is about the Anthem Project kind of touched on it, and that's housing and nonprofit capacity, because we've all discussed public-private partnerships as being key. And if you look at the work that's been done on homelessness for veterans, the VA has done amazing things, 12% drop, and on a course to really seek to end that problem. My question is about what gets measured gets done, and Secretary Shinseki has measured veterans' homelessness. With respect to partnerships and the nonprofit organizations that are out there ready to help, and the VSOs, it seems to me the VA is new to partnerships. What can the VA do, and what can nonprofits do to really build this bridge in a stronger way? Because we recognize nonprofits can't do it alone, and the VA doesn't have a perfect history with respect to partnerships. But we really got to invest in capacity and accessing nonprofits like the Volunteers of America and other organizations. So I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Can I just say, from the nonprofit sector, I think that the one thing that we can all do better is pull together more. We are not in competition with one another. I always say, if someone gives $1 to VOA, awesome. Just give that dollar to another organization that's helping veterans. And I know joining forces is supposed to be that in theory, but we really need to put that into practice, because then we become one big, massive private sector organization that can go into partnership in a position of strength with the VA.
And I don't think we're new at partnerships. I think we just need to get better at partnerships. So there's a young lady with me, Michelle Hammond, who's from our Public Affairs Office, and I'm sure that she can provide you with some information, some links, some VA experts that we can get better. You know, teach us how to be better at this, because we know that we can't do it alone.
Yeah, I can't say there's unparalleled partnerships going on in collaboration right now. We can't work at cross purposes. This is not a Volunteers of America issue. This is all of our issue and all of our groups. I see Major Israel from Salvation Army in the group because I can see her uniform from here. And, you know, we all need to work together to make this a reality and join together. And I think if we do, I think we'll be successful. If we don't, we won't come anywhere near to solving the problem.
I would underscore one thing that your question brings to light. The single central problem that you got to fix first is homeless veterans, without which nothing else is possible. When you look at these kids, they're living out of the back of a car. They got PTSD. They're unemployed. Nothing happens until you get them in a fixed address. Then you can tell the VA where they are. You can tell local social services providers, and things start to get better. You've got to fix homeless. Rick Shinseki pledged himself while he's in office to getting every vet off the streets. Thank God for that.
Doing a great job.
Yeah.
I want to direct your attention to a word that's been used occasionally, but not directly, and that is the rural issue. I'm Gary Filerman. I'm on the VOA board and president of the Atlas Health Foundation. Let's go back to North Dakota. But it's really not North Dakota, it's Pennsylvania, and it's New York State, and it's every place in this country where a guard unit has been called up or somebody's been recruited just out of high school with the opportunity to see the world and is back there now after 3 years, 20–30% of them with some visible or invisible injury, not a transferable skill, there are no jobs in town, they are not enrolled in the VA, and they're warehoused. And the number of those people is growing every day. I think we need a very determined rural veterans initiative that is not built on existing bureaucracy, but tackles that problem in terms of its unique cultural issues.
I know the VA has an advisory committee and an office that looks at rural outreach. So I can definitely get you their latest recommendations so that you can see what's being done. It's not enough, we need to do more, but you're absolutely right.
Right over here. You've had your hand up from the very beginning.
Okay. Good morning. It's still morning. I'm Bob Reeg. I'm with American Legion Auxiliary, and I'm interested in your comments on the role of volunteering, including national civilian service such as AmeriCorps, in addressing the challenges that we're speaking about today.
Can I answer that also as a civilian? Because traveling around and talking to a lot of people, I sort of bridge the two worlds. I'm not military, don't ever pretend to be. I'm so honored by everyone's service. But I feel like I'm an honorary member of the military and as a spouse. And I have so many civilians say to me, how can we help? We want to help. We want to come into the VA and read a book. I want to bring something. And I've talked to Mr. Shinseki about this, and there's so much bureaucracy that prevents, at the moat, the average civilian from coming in and helping. And we have to change that, because everybody out there wants to help in some way, and they want to help in tangible ways, not just write a check, but they want to go do something, especially in the acute care and the post-rehab stages where people really need that help. We are not set up as a country to allow that to happen, and we must make that more fungible somehow.
And to get their families involved.
Absolutely.
Man, there's a lot of parents, too, who want to get their children involved and get exposure to veterans, forge that bond, forge that understanding, and as well as cultivating that sense of service. I think there's room. Look, I know that the First Lady has put a lot of attention into this. I still think at the presidential level, to lead a discussion about what the challenges are, what the resources are, and really guiding people would be a tremendous asset. And let's face it, I mean, as a country, as we wind down from war, you have to then have that centralized leadership to say, this is the next mission, and this is what we all have a stake in. So I'll be very curious to see if somebody can really grab that mantle.
Hi, good morning. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Deborah Snyder, U.S. Army, retired. How many veterans are in here, by the way? Ooh. I want to recruit a lot of you. I've just started a nonprofit housing homeless veterans, Operation Renewed Hope Foundation. So we have a lot of veterans on our team. So my concern is obviously housing them. Operation Renewed Hope Foundation. With the downsizing of the military now, I know that we've gone a long way from 76,000 homeless veterans down to 68,000 around there from last year. Do you see the numbers going up or down with this downsizing? And the other part of the question is those guys that are on the verge, the guys and the gals that are on the verge of being homeless, where they are used to getting the BAH that so many of you guys are all used to, the housing allowance, and then maybe 6 months they're without a job and so forth. So do you see those numbers of homeless and on the verge of homeless going up, or do we really have a good plan to stop the flood and prevent the tsunami?
You know, I think from the ground level, I fear the same kinds of things, but we really have to close off that front door. If we close off that front door to homelessness and, you know, not let any more people fall into that state, we're better off and we deal with what's there. And I think that's going to take a lot of concerted work on our part and the VAs and all of us. You know, certainly VASH vouchers, certainly the TAP program, and more utilization of that particular kind of entity to make sure we connect people before they have the issues, and a lot of outreach. And I think we're going to have to put not only our staff, but VA staff, it's streets, it's being there, it's getting people to understand and work with people where they are. You're right, we need to prevent it from happening before it happens. And it's harder to deal with after people become homeless and are in that spiral. So prevention, to me, is where we need to focus a lot of our efforts upcoming.
We actually have someone from the homeless program office that can actually give some information about where VA is on homelessness.
Let's give this group a great round of applause. This is amazing, really amazing. This is only the beginning of this conversation. This conversation is going to last for at least 3 years for us as far as a public event is concerned. You have a flyer in your chair already announcing the date for next year, same time, same place, actually June 18th, 2013. We will do this again and continue to stay on this issue and work on this issue day in and day out. I want to thank all of you who are here for doing what you're already doing. We need to continue the themes that were talked about today and working together. And wouldn't it be great if we were all in one great big organization by the end of 3 years doing this together? That would be unbelievable. So let's work towards that. Thank you all, and thank you for coming.